I wanted to go over, I thought it was really important. We talk about all these strategies for food plots and manage your land, but I think sometimes we need to get back to the basics with food plotting because there's a lot of bad information out there online that encourages people to do this or that. And really, through experience for the last almost 30 years of planning food plots and designing food plot programs from a living, I mean, literally we've analyzed over 1,100 food plot programs in 26 states, spending a couple hours per day with those clients, those 1,100 clients, really honing in on their prescription for success when it comes to food plotting. So a lot of experience. And through that, there's a lot of things we did 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 15 years ago that we figured out worked really well or didn't work at all. And you see people recommending some of those bad things now. And my whole goal is to make sure that you are using your resources of time and money and effort in the right direction so that you can find success. So these are some basics I think we need to get back. And one of the things is so basic, you just assume, get a soil test. And, I'm not going to talk much about that. Soil test is what it is. It tells you how much lime to put down, what kind of fertilization you should do. And what I found, just in respect to that, is the more you're rotating summer soil builders, like we use buckwheat, and using rye within a big portion of your food plotting program, then you're putting a lot of nutrients, even tillage radish, which we recommend a high percentage of in your brassica blends, like through Northwoods Whitetails that we use. But you're putting back into the soil, not just taking from the soil. So anyways, the soil test, get a soil test, start from there. Lime, like I said, and people don't believe me, but I spread 65 tons of lime, 50-pound bags at a time over a 6 to 8 year period in the UP of Michigan to get my food plot program going up there. Each food plot required 4 to 5 tons of lime initially, and then on top of that, I'd have to add another ton every 3 years as a maintenance amount to keep that pH high. So what we use as an alternative is Plot Start and Plot Boost. Plot Start is a product from Deer Grow, and that's something that's not going to change your pH like lime does, but what it does is, what pH is doing is changing the soil enough that allows the soil and allows the plants that you're planting to uptake the nutrients from the soil. Plot Start does the same thing through a different process, and I don't understand it fully, the chemistry of it, but it does work. We've enjoyed it. Pretty stark contrast last year from where it was planted or where we sprayed and where we didn't. And it's pretty stark from those pictures from where it's growing on either side to where it's not growing as well in the middle. But I found is a good alternative to pH and a lot easier when I can just run it through a sprayer. Plot Boost, we use the same. Once the plants are green and growing, that aids in growth rate, in volume, and attractiveness. So very important, both those. But really, get a soil test, start from there. Number one, we're going over some of these basics. Again, I want to keep you guys from failing. Bad mixes. There's a lot of bad mixes out there. I don't remember the saying. Maybe Dylan could help me with this off the top of my head, but what's it? Master of none. I can't remember. But
Jack of all trades,
master of none. And that's an example of a lot of the food plot blends out there. It's a kitchen sink blend. You have seeds in there that are fighting each other. So you get low volume, low attraction, and you hinder your ability to have a great food plot. And especially with us, a lot of us don't have a lot of acres to work with. In Wisconsin, I have 2.25 acres of plots. Here in Minnesota, we have a lot more land. We have 15 acres of plots. And whether it's 15 or 2.25, they're both just as important. I can't afford to waste area and waste space. So we'll talk about ways here coming up in these 10 points and these 10 basics of ways that you can maximize the volume and the attraction on your plots, and you're not mixing things. And some examples of bad seed mixes, ryegrass is never appropriate to mix with anything. It's a noxious weed. It's almost like the grass in your lawn. It does work in very limited places, and that's the problem with a lot of this food plotting is some ryegrass, someone will have success with in a very limited opportunity, less than 2-3% of all food plotters it would be appropriate for, but yet they preach that as if this is, you use ryegrass everywhere. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And so you really have to consider the source and the location, the level of experience they have. Rye and wheat mixed with brassica. Rye and wheat, cereal grains, oats should be planted about 5 weeks later on average than your brassica blend. Brassica needs time to grow, mature. In fact, in the first month, it usually only grows 4 to 8 inches. The second and third month, it'll grow 12 to 15 inches or more. So each month. So it really needs to grow without any competition. Rye, wheat, oats is extreme competition. Not only should rye, wheat, oats not be planted that early, because by the time it gets into hunting season, it's too old, it's stemmy, too mature, not attractive, not nutritious. You need to plant that later in the year. Your brassica can't stand to fight. So when you see mixes that have rye, wheat, and brassica all in the same blend, and then they're adding peas in there, they're adding sugar beets, for example. Sugar beets are a great forage if you fence it. It takes a lot of acres to plant sugar beets and not have the deer eat it down to the dirt so that you ever get a beet in the first place. And that happens a lot. So I've seen some great sugar beet plantings that were fenced. So if you want to fence a 1/4 acre sugar beet, you can probably get several tons of forage. If you water it, manicure it, make sure the weeds are out of it, might be a great option for you. I'm not saying that sugar beets is a bad product or a bad seed, but when you mix it with brassicas, the sugar beets need to be planted month to 2 months earlier than the rest of the brassicas. It needs a longer time to mature. So when you're putting that in a mix and you're planting that in the fall, you're not going to succeed. It's going to fail. And so people are just putting that on the bag just to say there's sugar beets in it and draw your dollars out of you. It's a buzzword, no different than Austrian winter peas. Austrian winter peas, I found they do stay greener longer. There's cases where they'll stay green in through early January, where forage peas were turning brown and dying out in December. Bottom line is both were eaten down to the dirt by November. So the point is, Austrian winter peas, 60-70% more than forage peas, again, sucking your money out of you. And we'll talk about the amount of seeds, too much, too little. But that's where Austrian winter peas a lot of times fail. You want 100 pounds per acre, not 5 pounds per acre. So you really want a lot in your blends if you're going to be appreciable. A standalone pea planting is 300 pounds per acre. 100 pounds is only 1/3 of an acre when you spread it on an acre, if that makes sense. If you have 7 pounds of forage peas per acre, you're talking 1 plant every 30 feet. Not appreciable, not going to be there. So really watch out for bad mixes. And we're trying to increase volume and attraction. So we want rye, wheat, even oats, peas, beans over here. And we want brassica over here. We don't want to compete. No different than we're not putting these mixtures in the middle of corn, where corn's shading out and it's offering low volume. They're just certain seeds you don't mix with each other. Rye, wheat, oats, separate from brassica. Peas are a legume, beans are legumes, so you can put those with brassica, you can put those with oats, peas, and rye. It's going to grow. They're not competing for the same nutrients. So be very wary of those kitchen sink blends. People can sound really smart and say, well, this is growing. They love the oats when they're young, so they eat that first. They leave this alone in the same blend. And folks, that's just not true. And what's interesting, people have success in their little area, but that doesn't translate into 98% of the rest of the country. So you have to be very wary of mixes that people are pushing, but always keep in mind with those bad seed mixes. No ryegrass. Be very wary of sugar beets unless it's a standalone planting and fenced. And then at the same time, adding wheat and rye and oats with brassica, not a great combination. And so watch out for that. Watch wasting your money. Number 2, moisture timing. Always think about this. When you plant in the spring, let's say you're planting a perennial, or you're planting a spring crop in general, we had a lot of failures this year due to drought. It was a very dry year. When you're planting in August and September, moisture is on the increase all the way into the wintertime. Then you get another great shot in the spring. So if you're planting perennials, you plant them in the fall, not the spring. But bottom line is, with your fall plantings, moisture's on the increase over time, not on the decrease. When you plant in the spring, it's on the decrease. So the timing of when you plant, there's also a window there. I like planting brassicas August 1st around here. If you're in West Virginia, Tennessee, Oklahoma, some of these more southerly locations for the whitetail range, then maybe you're going to want to plant brassicas the 3rd week of August, because it's your frost date's a little bit later, and you're still going to be very hot the end of July, early August. You're pushing that planting date off a little bit. Where the UP of Michigan, northern Minnesota, upstate New York, northern Wisconsin, North Dakota, you might look at Vermont, New Hampshire, you might look at planting brassica a little bit earlier, end of July. You don't want to miss rain, but you have a window there. So even if your target date is July 25th, if you don't have moisture, wait. you have about a 2-3 week window there where you can have a good appreciable crop, but it's going to be based on the amount of moisture you receive initially when you put the seed down. So you don't want to put it in saying, well, it's dry right now, but it will rain in 3 weeks. We all know that in August. You're going to have August thunder showers. That's what happens. But you want to see that in the immediate forecast. Immediate meaning at least in the next several days. And what I'm looking for in that moisture timing, and it's the same with buckwheat. If I'm putting buckwheat down for my ultimate no-till blend, and I'm putting that down, and my target date's June 1st, well, if there's no rain, just wait till June 15th. No big deal. You have a little window there. This is not an exact planting date, not an exact science. There's a little bit of room for flexibility. So you need to look at when that seed is in the ground, you need to take advantage of moisture and make sure you're watching it. What I'm looking for in the weather, for example, this Friday and Saturday, we have a 51% chance of rain both days. Not too bad. We could get rain both days, but we'll probably get rain at least one of those days. It's flanked by 25 and 30% on either side for percentage of precipitation chance. So when I'm seeing a 25, 50, 50, 40, 30, 20, when I'm seeing that string of days like that, no, we're not going to get rain 5 days in a row, but we're probably going to get rain a day or two, and I'd be willing to plant in front of that. If I look in the forecast and I see a couple days of 20, 30 over the next 10 days, I'm waiting. I waited with my buckwheat this year. I couldn't plant before I left for my June Michigan trip. I was on the road for almost 2 weeks. And when I came back, we had the charity event for Kicking Bear. And so I looked at the weather forecast. I saw one day, it was a Friday in the middle of my trip, that had a good chance, flanked by not much of a chance. And it didn't rain. It actually rained right before we got back. We were able to put the buckwheat on the ground. And even though it's late, I'd rather start a crop late with immediate moisture than early with no moisture. Really watch your moisture timing and just make sure you plan for a little bit of flexibility around that planting date. Bottom line, when you're putting those fall crops in early August, you're going to get some thunder showers, and that's a big advantage toward planting over spring at any time. You have plenty of time to get your plots ready, control the weeds, get plots started on them, improve the pH before you get into that time and you're pressured to do something that really doesn't have a very high success rate or has a good chance of failure. Number 3, too much seed. When you're looking at oats, and you're mixing that with beans and peas, you can put too many oats early. You're just using August 1st if you're mixing with late planted beans and peas like I recommend, or August 15th depending where you're living. You can put too many oats. You can't put too many beans and peas. You're just wasting seed at that point. The oats are meant as a cover crop, a light cover crop, 25 pounds per acre, 50 pounds per acre at the most, especially on poor soil. So you're just looking at that cover crop. Brassica. Brassica can't stand competition, and it's not a legume like a bean or a pea or a clover. So when you're putting too many brassicas in, think of stunted bluegills or bass in a pond where there's so many fish, they eat nutrients, and so it stunts them. They can never grow to a typical mature size for the area. And that's the same with brassica. You'll see them turn colors, they're nutrient starved, a lot of times purples and reds, and they just can't live together in close proximity. It's kind of crazy with brassica. If the recommended amount, like our Northwoods Whitetail Sweet Feast blend that we recommend, John's mix is 6 pounds per acre. If you're putting 9 pounds per acre, you're going to get stunted plants. They're going to fight for nutrients. You're better off putting 4 pounds per acre than you are 7 or 8 or 9 pounds, if that makes sense. You can always go lower on the brassica. That's okay. You're going to get bigger, stronger plants, and you need a good growing season, good soil to get them to fill in. But that's better than being stunted and very small and taking nutrients from each other. So be very wary of putting too much seed. On the other hand, too little seed, you can always afford to put more peas down. If we're recommending 100 pounds per acre, 300 pounds is standalone planting. So you can put a lot more down. Beans, you can put down more, because if it's a late planted beans and pea mix with a little bit of oats, those beans and peas are going to be gone typically by November anyways. They're the candy crop. You're following up with rye. Rye, in that case, when you're following up 5 weeks later and early to mid-September, 3rd week of September, and you're planting that and just broadcasting it over the beans and peas and oats, then you can afford, instead of 200 pounds per acre, who cares if it's 250 or 275, you're just filling space horizontally. Not a big deal if you go over. You don't want too little rye in that case. Clover. If you put too much clover seed down, you're just wasting seed, but you're not hurting the planting itself. Corn. If you put too much corn out, it's fighting each other, and it's fighting for nutrients, and you're going to stunt the corn, and you're not going to get the actual production and harvest production and total volume of corn that you should be for the space that you have. So really be careful. Always follow the recommended seed. If you're buying a commercial blend of anything, do exactly how they say. And then when you're looking at some of these mixes that we recommend, whether it's WHS blend, we're looking at, you know, those late planted. I want to make sure I have enough beans, enough peas, and I want to make sure I use enough rye. And then I'm limiting the amount of actual brassica, even corn that I have in the ground, because I just don't want to have those plantings fight for nutrients. So be very careful on that. Number 5, weed control. Should have started with this. Weed control is critical. Unfortunately, there's advice out there where weeds are good in food plots. That refers to the summertime when deer have everything. They want that diversity in that food plot. Clover mixed with a lot of garbage. There's a lot of things they'll eat during the summer. They're green, they're growing, but once it gets into August, September, they turn brown and there's nothing there. It's no different than promoting herbaceous growth in the hardwood somewhere with burning. And you get all this nice green growth, but if that green growth is dead in October, November, it's not offering cover, it's not offering food, then maybe you should have opened up the canopy and actually got hardwood regeneration instead of green herbaceous growth. You're always looking at what can I do for timing when deer need it the most, and at the same time, fall, winter, that's when deer need the most habitat. It also coincides with your hunting season, so you can have a great hunt. Weed control is critical. I always encourage number 6 down here. A lot of times we encourage easy no-till process where we're spraying 3 times or throwing seed on the ground. We'll talk about number 10. I don't till, disc, plow, anything. You're just bringing up more seed. You're destroying the soil. In hill country, you're opening up the ground for erosion. So you're better off working on that top layer of soil. Always remember that it takes approximately 80 years to develop 1 inch of topsoil. So when you're just making frequent rotations of food plotting, you're working on that top layer of 1/32 of an inch of topsoil and organic matter. If you keep incorporating that into 4 inches of tilling, then you're drastically reducing the amount of nutrients on the topsoil and that top layer you're trying to build, and you just can't afford to do that in small plots. First spraying is critical when we're talking about the easy no-till process. That's because in the spring, those weeds are starting to really take off and at a pretty high pace. You don't want those weeds to get 3 feet tall, because then that's that weed debris that's hard to break down in this given year. The previous weeds and the previous thatch that's there is dry and brittle and ready to blow away and turn into the soil. So if you get that first green growth in those weeds and you don't hit them when they're 8, 10, 12 inches high, you wait till they're 2 feet or 3 feet, you have a lot of debris to try to get seed down through and work and incorporate into the soil even later in when it's important to plant towards the end of the summer. So your first spraying is always critical, and then you can follow up with 1 to 2 more sprayings if needed in that easy no-till process. And there's always that balance. Do you use a tractor? Do you use fuel? Do you use a disc, a tiller, a plow, rip up the soil, erode the soil, destroy that top layer of microorganisms that are helping the actual plants grow? Or do you use chemicals and control weeds? And to me, if you need to be efficient in your food plotter, always better to slant towards chemical use and actually control your weeds so you get the most out of your food plots. Again, that first spraying is critical because you're eliminating future weed debris. It'll make your life a lot easier. Fall cover crop. Great time, the best time to plant a perennial. It's not planting clover in the spring. That is not the best time. If clover happens to fit within your food plot program, you always put that in the end of the summer with a cool season annual. We started mixing brassica and clover, 99, 98, long time ago before anybody else was doing it. And you're putting brassica in, the brassica die out, and what you're left with is that foundation and that base of clover for the following year, but you're planting that brassica in August with, as a cover crop almost to that clover. The deer eat the brassica, that clover gets its roots established. By the time drought comes the following summer, it already has its roots established enough to where it's going to ward off any of that drought that comes. It might stun it back, but it's going to stay alive. As opposed to if you hit drought, a lot of people did this year where they're planting clover in the spring, hits drought, it dies out and it won't come back. So always better to establish that perennial with a cool season cover crop. You can use oats, they die out. We've used brassica a lot. use rye. So rye and clover does really well because rye doesn't compete with clover. Clover fixes its own nitrogen, and it can grow and not compete with that rye. Rye doesn't compete with the clover. And then you just mow the rye out in the spring or kill it with a grass-specific herbicide. Either way, you get rid of the rye, allow the clover to flourish, maybe even spring frost seed some clover. You never want to plan to frost seed clover if you could have done it in the fall. So you always plant in the fall, make sure its roots get established, and it'll ward off any drought. But you never want to wait till spring to say, okay, I'm going to plant my perennial blend here. Plant it with oats, plant it with beans, plant it with late planted peas, plant it with brassica, plant it with rye, plant it with wheat. Get that cool season annual cover crop on it. It'll act as a nurse crop, protect the clover, get it established, and help you fight off drought. But always establish your perennial bases in the fall with a cool season cover crop. I'd like to see you maximize in diverse volume. What I mean by that is if you're planting that kitchen sink blend, all these seeds are fighting each other. And the deer don't pick out the good stuff early and leave the other stuff over here. There's some talk about that where, well, we'll have oats in there. Deer love oats when they're young. Not really in early August. They don't like oats that much. Used as a cover crop, not a food source. They prefer the beans and peas and clover, brassica, anything else that's coming up at that time versus oats in early August. Now oats in early September, they hit pretty hard. That's when you're planting the 200 pounds of rye at that time. The bottom line is you're looking at non-competing crops over here, which would be beans, peas, oats, light oats with those beans and peas, maybe even a base of red clover that you want to till under the following year. But you put that all over here, none of it fights against each other, and then you have the brassica over here by itself. The reason you separate those is because not only are you maximizing the amount of diversity in your food plot, but you're maximizing the amount of volume that you can have overall, because you'll get the most out of this crop over here and the most out of this. Again, you don't want to be a jack of all trades but master of none as it relates to your food plots. You want to get the most here, be an expert in this side and an expert in that side, get the most out of this side to get the most out of that side, and that's the way you're going to maximize your food plots. You just don't have acres to waste. Not to mention, the deer herd does not appreciate a mixed garbage blend that reduces overall volume. So again, going back to the bad seed mixes, be very careful, because a lot of times those are just fighting each other and not offering enough volume for your hard work and money that you've saved to plant these food plots. So try to maximize a diverse amount of volume in your food plots. Like I said, I like putting half over here, half over there. This year in our big plots, because we have the room and the space and the amount of volume to do so, we have about 6 acres of corn spread out over 5 food plots. Those total at least an acre on each plot, and then we have another acre, at least an acre of greens. So we're doing 50% corn in that case, and then 25% in brassica and 25% of a green blend. Maybe your green blend in your area incorporates, you need to have layered rye, where you're planting your first 100 pounds of rye about 4 weeks before the first frost date. Then you're planting another 100 pounds 3 weeks later, and another 100 pounds 3 weeks later. You're trying to fill space horizontally, not vertically. And that way you keep that rye young and tender and something that the deer will actually appreciate. So always trying to think about that. How can I only have 2 acres. In Wisconsin, we have 2 1/4 acres of food plot to work with. I can't afford to waste area just playing around and trying to introduce something. For example, if I put beans there, early planted beans, spring planted beans, early June planted beans, they would be down to the dirt before the season even begins. So a waste of time, and we just know that up front. At the same time, if I put corn over there, it'd be a waste of time. I'd love to have corn on half of my plots, acre of corn over there, but it's not enough size for the area to actually last. And that's with the complement of ag there. If we were up north and had that same acreage, same size parcel, and 1/3 as many deer, that food plot's not going to last as long as even around here. So you really have to watch. Corn's great, beans great, but you have to maximize the tonnage you have and make it last for the entire season. So sometimes that means step down. You can never rank food plot seeds in accordance of attraction and nutrition. That's a very bad tactic to take. You need to look at the lowest hole in the bucket. How can I get green to last for the entire season, be appreciable during the hunting season, help the deer the most going into the winter time, and then you work from there. If you can expand it, do better like we do. We add corn as that next mix, and we don't need summer food plot plantings, and that goes into number 9 here. If you're trying to maximize the volume and diversity on your land, you can't plant summer food plots, and most small food plot programs are even medium size. I don't have any summer food planted here, and I have over 15 acres of food plots, and that's on 245 acres now. So I don't even use beans here. Why don't I use them? I could get them free. Why wouldn't I use them? Because they're going to be down to the dirt, and they're not going to offer anything in October, November. And so I don't want to plant something that might be great in December when I could have corn that's going to be almost as good. And when I have the green combination with corn, it's going to be a lot better than soybeans, because I can actually maximize the tonnage that I have on the plots, because I don't have a bunch of deer hanging out during the summertime, hitting those plots and then sticking around right away when that green crop comes up, that's actual important crop going into the fall. And so I don't plant summer food here, whether it be beans, clover, alfalfa, or anything, because then I'm also taking deer off the surrounding ag lands where they should be well spaced out, low stress. They have plenty of food around here. If I try to box them into a 2-acre field instead of letting them spread out into 100 acres, that's been professionally manicured for volume by the farmers that do this for a living, then I'm actually doing a disservice to the deer, increasing stress levels, and that's a bad thing when it comes to deer. Sure, if you're down in Texas and you have dry ground and arid summers, that's your lowest hole in the bucket. So we change that to your lowest hole in the bucket. You're always looking at that. But still, in order to build a herd, a quality herd and a quality hunt, that involves what's going on in the fall. I'm not saying in some of those arid areas you don't have a summer food source, but up here in the northern 25 states, it's a bad thing most of the time. So I don't plant summer food. And again, like I say all the time, I get paid to be right. I don't get paid to use a product just to use it. I don't do that personally. I use products and then endorse them if I believe in them, and that's it. And that's why I don't change products, because if I believe in it, a lot of times I was using that product before I was sponsored by them. I use it because I rely on it for my passion and love of all things whitetail, and that goes with summer food. I could get summer food free to plant. There's a reason I don't plant it. It's because it's not helping me at all. It helps my neighbors if I plant it, and if they plant it, it helps me. And that's why it's easy to compete around here, because most of the food plot programs are just strictly corn and beans, and that's not enough to build a herd, a great herd. In fact, you end up having problems around here with large parcels and too many does. They don't have enough hunters to take care of the does. The first step in reducing doe population numbers is to get rid of the summer food source, and that's not because you're hurting the deer, it's because you want them to be somewhere else during the summer, establish summer fawning somewhere else, most likely in a lot better habitat during the summer, because if you're working on fall and winter habitat, fall food, fall cover, winter food, that's the lowest hole in the bucket. Deer in these northern 20-25 states have several times more food than they need during the summer. You're not helping them in any way. You need to get through that. That thought is very important. You're not helping the deer herd because you haven't some. In a lot of cases, like when we're surrounded by ag, we don't want deer in our little food plots here, even if they're a couple acres, because we're doing the deer a disservice by not pushing them as much out into the neighbor's ag land to feed on the professionally manicured summer plots. And if you're in a northern region, there's many times more available pounds per acre of food than the deer can consume. They live high in the hog all summer long. But boy, when it gets into fall and the winter, they're really actually starving during the winter. They don't starve during the middle of the summer. So summer food, typically not, unless you're trying to build a herd, establish the pattern of use for new food plots. But even in our area, this ag area, when I have new food plots, I'm not planting summer food, because it's going to hinder my ability to actually produce and maximize a diverse amount of volume on my plots during the fall. And number 10, do you need a tractor? I love tractors. I had a tractor I put over 500 hours on. I cleared food plots with it. I planted food plots. And with my busy schedule and for the amount of acres that I plant a year, anywhere from 18 to 20 acres, then in multiple states, then I don't plow, I don't disc, I don't till, and for that, I believe I have better plots. I control weeds to a higher degree, and you can use things like tillage radish to break up the soil, lift the soil. You can use a high percentage of tillage radish in your brassica blend. You can use medium red clover planted in the fall if you want to actually improve the soil with the root system. You can improve the soil with the root system with buckwheat during the summertime. So you can practice rotations and use sprayings, mowings, whatever it might be, to build your food plots and build the nutrients in the soil instead of disking and plowing and constantly ripping up that soil. So I don't disc, I don't till, I don't plow. I haven't for years. Tractors are great. We have one to mow the lawn to keep the brush down. I'd like to put a cone-shaped broadcaster on it. That'd be kind of cool for some of the larger seeds. Maybe a brush hog behind it. We have a mid-PTO mower right now that's more for our lawn and for the area. I'd like to have a front end loader. You know, I miss my front end loader just for carrying things around the property. Transplanting trees or shrubs, carrying seed out. The front end loader is the world's greatest wheelbarrow. When you combine it with something that you can mow with, brush hog with, spread seed with, tractor's a great thing. My tractor is 23 horse Kubota with 4-wheel drive. I had a 48 horse before. I had loaded tires, I had a cab, I had the box scraper, had a tiller, had a brush hog, had a cone-shaped spreader, had a front end loader, had heat in it. But I don't need that. And I don't need it for good plots, and neither do you. And keep in mind, you know, other than having Brandon come out and put our corn in for us, and while he was here, he drilled in some buckwheat for us, and you can even see between the buckwheat, it's not growing in nice pretty rows, but the buckwheat does really, really well when you just broadcast on top of the soil. In fact, you can hardly tell a difference between the two. They're doing great right now, and that was more a matter of convenience and opportunity. But most of the property, and solely in Wisconsin, and then most of the plots here in Minnesota, we're managing purely with broadcasting, ATV, UTV sprayers, our Packer Max, Call the Packer, handheld broadcaster. So there's a lot you can do with very minimal equipment. Don't ever let the lack of resources for equipment bog you down and make you think that you can't have good food plots, because that's what I've been doing for 25 years now or more, since the mid-90s, and it's worked out really well. And what's interesting, I find I can have the same plots, but I'm spending a lot less time. When you're just spraying and going quick with a mobile bag sprayer or spreader and getting seed on the ground, packing it in, everything happens quick. And that's the way we're planting a lot of our switchgrass. I think I have about 9 acres of switchgrass here. I have about 3 to 4 acres that were machine planted in total. The rest was planted with a variety of methods, including frost seeding, mowing, spraying, and making sure I get that switch established. So there's a lot you can do without a lack of equipment. No tractor, no tiller, no disc, no plow, no problem. You can still have great plots. So I'm probably missing some basics here, but this is what I've learned over the last 26 years of planting food plots since '95. And I'm not saying that I'm not missing things. What's really cool is every time I go to a client and I interview them about their food plots, their past experiences, their neighbors, what's going on with their neighbors' food, how deer are reacting to them using their food plots or over hunting their food plots. Are they browsing them down to the ground based on a certain size? You see a lot of similarities between clients, but the cool thing is I learned something on every client. So 1,100 clients and counting in 26 states, and I'm still learning, and I try to bring that to you. These are some of the basics that are tried and true with not only my own food plotting experience of 18 to 20 acres of food plots per year in multiple states, but also the feedback from you, the viewer, readers, and certainly my client properties as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this. These are some basic. I just want to make sure that you're on the right track. You have great food plots this fall. You don't get sucked into spending your dollars on things that are time wasters or money wasters with bad mixes and bad seeds, things like that. So most of all, have fun with the food plotting this year. Go forward with your food plotting with especially some of these tips that you can get the job done and get it done correctly with a very low failure rate. I can say since '95, the food plots that I've had fail are probably 3% or less of all food plot plantings I've ever had, and they're fairly predictable. You know, spring plantings and then you get drought. But just these basics right here, there's so much more to food plotting. We had the food plot web class that I came out with about a month ago, and it's a follow-up to our how to design a whitetail property. But our food plot web class, we have 30 videos. It goes over how to plant, how to create food plots, what to plant, when to plant. It goes over everything, spraying, chemicals, favorite implements. So there's a lot put into that food plot web class that can help you be on the right track and make sure that you're not only avoiding some of the pitfalls, that you're not only accepting and practicing some of the tried and true methods that really can help you, but that you're looking at the overall strategy, how it relates to your land, your hunt, how you can hunt your plots, how you shouldn't hunt your plots, and all those basics for the entire movement and lines of movement that you're trying to create on private land when you're planting food plots. And that web class will really help you. The link is in the description. I hope you like these 10 basics right here. If you follow these right here, you're going to be on the road to success with not only your food plots, the summer and into the early fall, but with your hunt during the fall and early winter as it relates to your ability to actually not only influence your hunt, but influence the neighborhood deer herd in the right direction going into this off season.